Hi there, my name is Toby. Welcome to my channel, Toby Urban Sketch. Today we are looking at 5 key fundamentals of sketching. Going to cover them really quickly, 2 or 3 minutes on each. The idea is to give you things to think about, things to develop, and a bit of confidence as well, because these things are really simple and they can really make a huge difference to feeling like you can't sketch through to feeling like you're super confident and all your sketches are going brilliantly. Of course, let me know what you think of these fundamentals in the comments. Be particularly interested to hear if you think there's one I missed out, one which you think is fundamental and should have been included instead of one of these 5. Now, if you want to join me for more in-depth courses, head across to sketchloose.co.uk, where I've got my sort of personal independent published course called Developing Line Work and Mark Making. In that we cover tips like this, but over a huge amount more detail. So there's something like 4 hours of video in the course and 30 pages of handout where we really dive in deep to lots of different sketching concepts. So if that sounds like interesting, head across there. Otherwise, let's continue with this video here. So the first fundamental, the first thing we're going to talk about is the idea of sketching with wobbly and loose lines. And I'd argue there's a couple of very good reasons to do this, very good reasons why I make this a fundamental. So firstly, just look on the right. It's so much more interesting. It adds so much more character even to a super simple sketch. And I mean, the best way to demonstrate why I do it, I think, is just to head in and just start doing a little sketch. So I'm using my Lamy Safari extra fine fountain pen here, and notice how as I draw this simple sort of shape or this simple outline, I'm just drawing a loose line. I'm purposefully wobbling and purposefully adding in some interesting shapes. Now this means a couple of things. It means, number one, I'm always thinking about my line. I'm always ready to move it. I'm always sort of purposely moving it. If we did these quickly and bold and hard lines, we wouldn't be thinking constantly about our line. We wouldn't be sort of ready to change it. We wouldn't be adding character constantly. Now, if we go along the top, it means as we're moving along, we think about a line and we recognize, oh, we've made a mistake, we left something out. We can come back. We can respond to that really quickly. We can make mistakes like this as well, and instead of that ruining the image, actually just fits with the whole aesthetic of the image. It fits with the rest of that wobbly line. So because we're always thinking, it means we avoid mistakes and we are agile, creating character. And if we do the opposite, if we do a bold, hard line, what we'll notice is if we overshoot, there's no coming back from it. That overshot line is there forever. It's hard and it looks wrong. If we've made our lines wobbly, then it's really easy to just come back, bring the line back to the right place. We won't overshoot as far because we're thinking about our line, we're thinking about moving it the whole time. And as a result, we end up with a more interesting sketch, one which is more forgiving on mistakes, and just one which is more absolutely jam-packed and full of character. Now, the other thing about doing wobbly lines is it's quick. So even when I then start adding in little details, I'm not worrying about making a perfect straight line. I'm just finding little loose shapes. I'm joining things up. I'm adding character all the time. If I try to make a hard line nice and straight, I have to think, take it slow, and we end up with this really bold line. So loose lines, my first tip. Fundamental 2 is a sort of sensible follow-on from that. It's the idea of simplification, and simplification is absolutely key in all of this, in all of sketching. Everyone does it. It doesn't matter if you are a very beginner sketcher or if you're an absolute master of the most complex oil painting. It starts with simplification. And let's just take a silly little scene here. Now, if we start looking at this scene and thinking, right, we need to draw a house and a house and a house, it gets quite difficult. There's lots of odd things, perspective and details. If we go, we need to draw a square, a little rhomboid and a rectangle with a sort of triangular roof on top, and a triangle here as well. And then on the other side, you've got this church, which just needs a little rectangle, and we can find some other shapes within that. Well, actually, before you know it, just with these really simple steps, we've built up our scene already. Now this is obviously a very simplified sketch. It's very quick and it's only for demonstration purposes, but this idea of simplification, and particularly simplification using simple shapes, is really important, and it really just helps you gain the essence of a scene. For example, if we wanted to add in a tree, look at this lovely little tree which is immediately there. And what are we doing? As well as simplifying, we're just suggesting. And so here we've got a little man, and he's just one line. He's a ball with a line under him. So when we're simplifying, we're finding shapes, we're finding things, but we're suggesting those details. Rather than drawing every little bit, we can suggest details through simplified line work. Now, the third aspect, and this is one which people are often very keen to learn about, is the idea of anchor measurements, or rather people often want to know, how can I get my proportions right? How can I easily measure things and it just work, it just look right? Well, for me, the simplest way of doing this, and the way that I think we naturally gradually learn to do, is through an anchor measurement. So if we take another sort of random scene, what we could do is we could draw the most interesting part of the scene first, or the sort of fundamental part of the scene, getting that the right size on our page, and then we use that as an anchor. So this is our anchor measurement for height. So now everything else we look at and we compare it to that to try and get everything else in proportion to that. So perhaps it's got a roof, and that roof is about one of our anchor measurement high. So we can just draw that in. We've got a roof about an anchor measurement high. Then it's got a wall at the back, or a line at the back. Because it's further away, it's shorter. And so we look at it and we go, right, it's just less than an anchor measurement in height. Then we can join it up. And without having to think about perspective, notice how we've already got that perspective feel in, just because we've measured things approximately right. Now we could be in the back and be thinking, there's a really small house in the back. It ends a bit higher. It's about half of an anchor measurement tall. So we can measure that out and then extend the line across to make the rest of that shape. The roof above it perhaps is even shorter. Maybe it's a third of an anchor measurement. But again, we measure that and we can eyeball it out. And then we can do the same with other details. Maybe this tree is, the bushes to it are an anchor measurement high. And we then just start doing our suggestions of details on top. Our suggestions of details on top of all those shapes which have come from simplification, which we can measure out through this anchor measurement. And now this is a little diversion into how to add a bit more texture and interest to things, and it's the idea of hatching. Hatching is a wonderful technique for basically increasing the texture on a page with your pen, also for increasing the darkness or shadow on your page with your pen. And there are lots of ways of doing it, and most often people think of hatching as cross-hatching, but actually both of these techniques are hatching. We've got on one side we've got vertical hatching only, on the other side we've got wobbly hatching. And the aim for each of these is to increase the value. So if you look at this value scale, basically the more hatching you do, the darker it gets, the higher value that it gets. But that's also a little bit of a trap, because it's not just about the value, the shadows. It's also about making things interesting, about adding texture and adding just visual fascination and being loose in your sketch. So let's try it out on a really simple scene again, just another little doodle where we'll sketch out a really quick house and use our light and loose wobbly lines, really simplified shapes, little suggestions of details in the windows. And how can we then use hatching to make this feel 3D, to make this feel interesting? Well, so let's apply a light. So this is the sun, and that's the direction of the light. So we can then decide from there where's our shadows going to be. So under the eaves, under the side of the house, then on the side facing us, which is facing away from the light. And by really simple hatching, suddenly the house is feeling 3D, it's feeling more interesting. What we can do, we can change the direction of the hatching. So we could continue vertical hatching on the floor, but if we are changing planes, we're changing from a surface which is vertical to horizontal. If we change the line of the hatching to reflect that, then it literally shows that we've changed plane. It's a really neat, easy, efficient way of just showing we've got a different surface. We can then vary the value, vary the shadow by doubling up our hatching. So coming under the eaves again, we'll have a darker shadow. And we don't need to worry about sticking within the lines. Again, these lines which float over, which aren't perfect, add a lot of visual interest. They add a lot of interest. They're mistakes, or they're not. They're looseness. They are just having a lot of fun. So now we've got a 3D house with a heap of texture really quickly through hatching. So number 5 is the idea of mistakes. Now the first thing I want to say is that mistakes happen to everyone. There are mistakes in everyone's art. It's just that we notice our own mistake. So when you look at someone's art that isn't yours, you might look at a mistake and think, oh wow, what an incredible creative decision they've made. So the first thing to do is recognize that actually mistakes are okay, and they can look really interesting, and they add the humanity, the fascination to art, which we don't get through perfection and through photos. But when they happen, how are we going to cope with them? Well, tip number 1 is just a really loose line. That means if I make them, my little lighthouse here too short, I can come back. I'm agile with my line and I can make it taller. Oh, now look, I've made it the angle wrong, and I can go back. And these loose lines, which are mistakes, will soon disappear. They'll look like that texture. They will fit in with any hatching we apply. All these other things will cover them up and they'll just become part of the art. So tip number 1 is keep those loose, agile lines back from tip 1. Because look now, let's try some hatching. Let's apply a little bit of shape and shadow, and suddenly look, have those lines, caused a fuss, or actually now they just suddenly disappeared into the background and they look fine. They look part of the intention of this sketch, which they weren't. I didn't know what mistakes I was going to make, and it's fine. At the top I could also start trying to add the roof or the light of the lighthouse, and I could forget. I could make it far too short, but it still looks fine. The only person who's going to know that this is wrong is the person who decides to check, oh, there should have been 4 windows down here. There should have been an extra layer to the light at the top. No one will know this unless they're directly comparing. So the other aspect about mistakes that it's important to know is that it's fine to have made decisions. Even if those decisions are, oops, I've made a mistake, I'm going to change this so that it fits my mistake. That is still a creative decision that you're making, and it's still fine. And the art still looks fine. So be loose, be light, be prepared to make mistakes, be prepared to respond to mistakes, but be prepared to change your image to fit them as well, and just don't worry. So there you are, my sort of 5 key fundamentals of sketching. And if you can just grasp these basic ideas, then you are certainly ready to move on to thinking about more complicated things, or just developing, having fun, experimenting and working out what your style is. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please do like and subscribe. If you have another fundamental you want to tell me about, something I should have thought about in this video, then let me know in the comments. And most importantly, happy sketching. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel, because it makes me really, really happy. Thanks again.